Good day to everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of Throwing It Back with Shawn Farrell. I am Shawn Farrell. God is great all the time. All the time, God is great. And let's get into it. So, one of the things we're going to talk about today is Shawn Kemp. He is often not mentioned when you talk about some of the great players that have played the game in the history of the NBA. He was drafted in 1989 by the Seattle Supersonics, and believe it or not, Shawn Kemp was booed on draft night. Okay, he was booed on draft night, and he was coming to a Sonics team that finished 47-35 the year before in 1989. Coming to a veteran lace team with Dale Ellis, Xavier McDaniel, Derek McKee, Steve Johnson, Olden Polynice, Dale Threet, Nate McMillan. So he was coming to a pretty good team in Seattle. Averaged a little over 7 points a game his rookie year, but he could dunk the basketball. If you may recall, one of the more famous dunks he had was when he came off when he had a pick for Dana Bayros. Then he came off that pick and did a reverse two-handed jam over Kenny Walker. You can find that on YouTube. And so he averaged over 7 points a game. Averaged over 15 points a game his second year in 1991. Xavier McDaniel being traded earlier in the year opened the door for Kemp to enter the starting lineup. Averaged 15 points a game. So he was coming along as a young star. Seattle finished 41-41. They also had Gary Payton that year as a rookie. Lost to Portland in 5 games in the first round. Casey Jones was fired midway through the 91-92 season. George Karl took over. Shawn Kemp actually came off the bench again that year. Shawn Kemp came off the bench that year. But he was pretty good against Golden State in the first round, including the story behind that Alton Lister dunk. He had gotten into a fight with Alton Lister in Game 2 in Golden State. Golden State won Game 2, but he had gotten into a fight with Alton Lister in Game 2. And as you may recall, Shawn Kemp had one of the most thunderous dunks over Alton Lister, and then did the So, yeah, not only did he have the Lister blister, he also had a dunk over Chris Gatling that game. He dunked over Chris Gatling, and Chris Gatling gave him dap. Chris Gatling said, "Nice dunk, man." And then at the end of that game, as you may recall, Gary Payton came down on a fast break, and Shawn Kemp went up and got it, and that was pretty much the end for Golden State. Seattle ended up winning the series 3-1. And so Shawn Kemp was really coming into his own. And I believe he put on 20 pounds during the offseason so he can handle 20 pounds in the offseason so he could handle the league's big man. So and it paid off for him. He can handle some of the more bigger players in the NBA. And so Seattle went to the 93 Western Conference Finals, lost to the Suns in 7. This is also around this time where you begin to hear whispers that Shawn Kemp was involved with drinking. And but didn't affect his play on the court as the Sonics went 63-19. Became the first 1 seed to lose to an 8 seed in the Denver Nuggets. He almost got traded to the Bulls for Scottie Pippen, that offseason, if you may recall, the trade that never had happened. And believe it or not, the trade was done. The trade was done. And but at the last fraction of a second, Seattle backed out of it. At the last fraction of a second, Seattle backed out. Pippen stayed in Chicago. Kemp stayed in Seattle. Jordan comes back, defeats the Seattle Supersonics in the '96 finals. So it's kind of a cause and effect. So it's kind of a cause and effect situation of the trade that did not happen. But before the '97 season, Shawn Kemp was pretty unhappy that he didn't get a contract extension. And as you may recall, the old head NBA fans will remember. The old head NBA fans will remember the Seattle Supersonics gave Jim McIlvaine a big contract. The Seattle Supersonics gave Jim McIlvaine a big contract. And in case you didn't hear it again, the Seattle Supersonics gave Jim McIlvaine a big contract over Shawn Kemp. Okay. And Shawn Kemp was not happy about that. And I don't blame Shawn Kemp for being happy about that. You give a guy like Jim McIlvaine that much money over me? Come on, man. So, Kemp wasn't happy about it the whole year. There was a stretch in the '96-'97 season where he was playing poorly. And it was reported that Gary Payton called a players only meeting that season, and Shawn Kemp admitted that he had been drinking a lot. And so it affected his play slightly because his defensive efficiency was down. So it affected his play slightly, but he was still pretty damn good. And so after the Rockets were eliminated in 7 games, after the Sonics were eliminated by 7 games by the Houston Rockets, Kemp asked for a trade, was sent to the Cavaliers in a 3-team deal. Also got a 7-year contract from the Cleveland Cavaliers. Wasn't as effective in Seattle. Wasn't effective in Cleveland, as he was in Seattle. Because there was no Gary Payton there to back him up. It was just basically Shawn Kemp and a bunch of role players. Cedric Henderson, Brevin Knight, Derek Anderson, Zydrunas Ilgauskas. Yep, that is Zydrunas Ilgauskas. Yep. So it was just basically Shawn Kemp and a bunch of role players. They had Wesley Person that year as well. But Kemp still had a pretty good year. Made the All-Star team. Lost to the Pacers in the first round, 3-1. Then the '98 lockout happened. Kemp came back to training camp in January at 315, and he started the season at 280. Okay. So he was asked what happened by Wayne Embry, the GM of the Cavaliers at that time. Said, what happened? And Shawn Kemp was honest. He said, Coach, Wayne, I thought we weren't coming back. So he was honest, but still had the Cavaliers in scoring. But he wasn't the old Shawn Kemp. There were some jokes made, and there were some jokes made about Shawn Kemp I've heard throughout the years. They were talking about how the lockout kind of ruined certain players' careers. Shawn Kemp was one of those players, and one of the jokes I heard, you remember, Shawn Kemp was effective, really, really effective. Then the 98 lockout happened when he went from the Rain Man to the Pizza Man. So that's one of the jokes I heard about Shawn Kemp. He went from the Rain Man to the Pizza Man. But he averaged a career high 20.5 points, 99 to 2000. But the Cavaliers were one of the worst teams in the league, finished at 32-50 that year. And Kemp was traded to the Trailblazers. And Shawn Kemp was clearly a shell of himself. Traded to the Trailblazers. He ended up checking into rehab late in the season for drugs and alcohol. And ended up missing the late part of the season, and he also missed the entire postseason as well. Came back with the Blazers 2001, 2002. Again, was a shell of himself. Signed with the Orlando Magic for 2002, 2003. He actually started 75 games that year. He played in 79 games, and he started 75, okay? And he was the center, okay? He was the center that year. And, but he came off the bench in the playoffs when they lost to the Pistons 4 games to 3. So, and his NBA career pretty much ended after that. So it was a decline of Shawn Kemp after the lockout. And of course, if you've been keeping up, was just convicted of shooting somebody. So it's sad to see the way Shawn Kemp ended his career, all the things he's gone through in his personal life. So it's sad and heartbreaking. It's sad and heartbreaking. Yeah. Also, you remember when I talked about when the 2 critical plays that swung the title in the Bulls' favor in Game 6 of the 1998 NBA Finals? Well, it's become apparent that some Utah Jazz players are still salty, because I saw something that Antoine Carr said that the Chicago Bulls were lucky to beat the Utah Jazz. And here's what I got to say about all that, okay? Despite the fact that those 2 calls went against you, you still led 86-83 with 43 seconds to go. So you had the lead. But here's the problem. The Bulls have Michael Jordan, okay? And I'll leave it at that. You led 86-83 with seconds to go, but you couldn't stop Michael Jordan. And so there you have it. And I'm reading Antoine Carr's quote. And I said, I literally just talked about this a little while ago. I literally just talked about this same thing a little while ago. That Howard Isley 3-pointer that didn't count. Ron Harper's shot in the 4th quarter that should not have counted. Still salty after all these years, aren't you, Utah? That's a damn shame. Still salty after all these years. You led 86-83. And you couldn't stop Michael Jordan. And I'll just leave it at that, okay? I'll just leave it at that. Alright? So, my suggestion to Antoine Carr and all the Utah Jazz players, quit being salty, okay? Alright. That's it for Sean Farrell. That's it for Throwing It Back with Sean Farrell. Peace out, y'all. God bless.